The dawn came thin and brittle, like light spilling through a cracked jar, laying pale streaks across the Briggs ranch. Fences leaned with wear, boards missing, the barn roof patched with tin that rattled whenever the wind turned sharp. A man moved slowly across the yard, boots sinking into dry earth that had forgotten rain. Samuel Briggs, broad-shouldered once, was now bent by years of toil and the hollow pull of hunger. His hair, once black, had thinned to iron gray, his face carved with lines that no rest could soften. In his hands he carried a pail that rattled empty, the echo of his poverty louder than words. Beside him walked a Mustang, ribs faintly ridged beneath a dark coat, scars cutting pale tracks across his flank. His mane was coarse, tangled from wind, yet his eyes burned with the kind of fire that refused to dim. Ash! That was what Samuel called him, after the color of smoke at dawn. There had been a time when the horse was meant for slaughter, tied to a post with no buyer willing to spare a coin. Samuel had stepped forward with nothing more than a few crumpled bills and a weary voice that said, "I'll take him." Since then, the two had become inseparable, bound less by ownership than by quiet need. Samuel paused by the fence and rested his hand against Ash's neck. The horse leaned into the touch, snorting softly. "You and me," Samuel muttered, voice graveled with fatigue. "No one else left, but that's enough." His words hung in the still air, neither promise nor lament, but something in between. From the road beyond the fields came the slow thunder of hooves. Dust plumed as riders approached, and at their head sat Clint Hargrove. The man was everything Samuel was not. Rich with land, fat with cattle, his coat pressed, his boots gleaming. His eyes, cold as coins, swept the ranch as though measuring it for purchase. Samuel stiffened, straightening as much as his frame allowed. Ash pinned his ears, the horse's muscles tensing at the scent of menace. "Briggs," Clint called, drawing up at the gate. "It's near winter, and my patience wears thin. You owe me more than you'll ever earn from this sorry patch of dirt. Time's come to settle up." Samuel said nothing at first, his jaw tightening. He knew the debt was real. Tools borrowed when his barn collapsed, feed bought when the drought dragged on too long. But Clint had never offered kindness without expecting more than repayment. He dealt in desperation, and Samuel had been too tired to resist. "I'll have it," Samuel answered at last, voice steady though his chest ached with a lie. Clint smirked. "By winter's end, then, or the land's mine. And don't think your nag can save you." His gaze flicked dismissively at Ash before he turned his horse and rode back with his men. When the dust settled, Samuel sagged against the fence. He pressed a hand to his chest, where the old ache gnawed deeper each day. Ash stepped close, nudging him with a rough muzzle, as if to push the weight away. Samuel let out a brittle laugh. "Reckon he doesn't know the measure of you, old friend. Reckon none of them do." That night, the ranch lay wrapped in darkness. The wind carried strange sounds. Low growls, circling footsteps in the grass. Wolves, their eyes glimmered like shards of ice beyond the fence line. Samuel reached for the rusted rifle by his door, but his hands shook. Before he could lift it, Ash surged forward, hooves striking against the ground. The Mustang charged the shadows, rearing high, screaming a challenge that split the night. Wolves scattered, snapping but retreating from the fury in his stance. Samuel, breath caught, watched as the horse drove them off, unyielding until silence reclaimed the yard. When at last the threat faded, Ash returned, sides heaving, sweat darkening his coat. Samuel laid a trembling hand against him, overwhelmed not by fear but by awe. "It's you and me against the whole damn world," he whispered, and though the words were soft, they rang with a resolve stronger than debt, stronger than despair, binding man and horse to whatever lay ahead. The town square buzzed with noise, though much of it was laughter that bit rather than welcomed. Samuel Briggs stood near the post where riders signed their names for the autumn race, his hat pulled low, his shoulders squared against the stairs. Ash stood beside him, tethered yet unbroken, the Mustang's restless hooves striking the packed dirt. Men leaned against fences and wagons, their smirks sharp as knives. They saw not loyalty or spirit, but a ragged pair clinging to pride. "You reckon that old nag will make it past the first mile?" One voice jeered. Another spat tobacco into the dust, adding, "Briggs should race hunger. He's known it longer than horses." The laughter rippled, but Samuel neither flinched nor replied. He simply wrote his name with a hand that trembled slightly, though whether from weakness or suppressed anger, even he could not say. When he tied off the pen, he touched Ash's mane as if sealing the choice. The purse was modest compared to what Clint Hargrove demanded, yet it was all Samuel could reach for. A victory might pay enough to buy time, to stave off loss. More than that, it would remind him, and them, that he was not finished yet. Ash shifted, ears flicking as though sensing the weight of expectation. Samuel whispered low, "We've nothing left to bargain with, boy. So it's you and me running for our skin." Back on the ranch, the training began. Samuel rose before dawn, his body aching as he saddled Ash with care. Each lap around the field was a test, not only of the horse's stamina, but of Samuel's will to endure. The land had turned to dust beneath hooves, the air dry enough to scrape lungs raw, yet Ash pressed on. When Samuel's grip faltered, the Mustang slowed just enough to steady him, never letting him fall. Their breaths rose in rhythm, man and beast bound in shared struggle. At night, Samuel coughed hard into his sleeve, crimson staining the fabric where no one could see. He leaned against the stall, Ash watching with eyes that gleamed like dark fire in lantern light. "Don't you look at me like that," Samuel muttered, voice hoarse. "If I fall, you keep going. Don't stop for me." But Ash did not blink, and Samuel felt the absurd certainty that the horse understood and refused the command. Whispers wound through the tavern soon after. Men spoke of Samuel's foolishness, of a horse too worn to last. Others recalled his past, a younger Samuel riding fierce in rodeos, cheered by crowds, before he vanished into obscurity. They said his wife's sickness had broken him, that his pride had been buried alongside her. What no one spoke aloud was the truth Samuel carried like stone. He had nothing left to lose. One evening, when the air turned cold and stars bled faint through cloud, Samuel collapsed near the corral. His legs gave way, sending him to the dirt. Ash came quickly, lowering his great head to nudge him upright. Samuel's chest heaved, pain carving deep, but he managed a rasping laugh. "You're the stubborn one," he whispered. "Can't even let me die in peace." With effort, he clung to the horse's mane until the storm of weakness passed. Meanwhile, Clint Hargrove sat in a polished chair across town, sipping whiskey as his hired rider leaned close. "You'll see he doesn't finish," Clint murmured. "A man that poor doesn't deserve a miracle." Coins exchanged hands, the promise of sabotage dark as the drink in his glass. Clint's smile carried no warmth, only the satisfaction of a hunter tightening the snare. The night before the race, Samuel laid out the worn bridle, mended with frayed rope and stubborn hands. He brushed Ash's coat, lingering over every scar. "Tomorrow they'll laugh," he said quietly. "But we'll show them. Win or lose, we'll show them." The horse breathed steady, pressing close, and Samuel felt strength flow back into his weary bones. The silence between them was not empty. It was a vow. When the lantern finally guttered, Samuel lay awake, hearing the faint stir of wolves far off in the hills. Yet fear did not take him. Instead, he pictured the track, the roar of the crowd, the feel of Ash surging beneath him. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the hunger and pain, he felt a spark. Tomorrow would be no ordinary day. Tomorrow would decide if their bond was strong enough to outlast despair. The morning of the race broke with a chill that crept through bone and sinew. Samuel Briggs stood in the shadow of the stables, tightening the rope bridle across Ash's scarred head. His hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the fever that had gnawed at him all week. He pressed his forehead briefly against the horse's neck, drawing steadiness from the warmth there. Beyond the fence, the town gathered, their voices rising in waves of mockery, anticipation, and doubt. Every sneer, every laugh was meant to remind him he did not belong. Clint Hargrove's stallion gleamed like polished obsidian, muscles rippling under an expensive saddle. Men crowded around, praising its strength, praising the surety of Clint's purse. Samuel led Ash forward with none of that glamour, just the stubborn pride of a man unwilling to bow. The crowd's laughter swelled. "Look at that nag! Might break before the first turn." Samuel said nothing, only swung himself onto Ash's back with the awkward grace of one who had done it 1,000 times but carried too many years now. The starter's pistol cracked, and the field leapt forward. Hooves thundered, dust swirled, and the ground shook beneath the weight of ambition. Samuel clung tight, the world blurring around him. Ash surged, each stride fierce, his breath steaming in the cold air. The pack pressed together, horses jostling for position. Whips cracked, shouts rose. A sharp cry erupted when one rider cut across Ash's path, the move deliberate. Samuel pulled hard, swerving wide to avoid collision. He caught the glint of a coin purse in the man's pocket, Clint's mark as clear as a brand. Rage burned hot in his chest, but there was no time for fury. He urged Ash forward, whispering into the wind. The Mustang responded, digging deeper, closing the gap with a relentless rhythm. Halfway through, Samuel's body betrayed him. Pain flared sharp across his ribs, his breath catching. His vision tunneled, spots swimming in the corners of his sight. For a heartbeat, he thought he would fall. But Ash slowed just enough to steady the sway, balancing him like a partner who refused to let him go. The crowd gasped as if sensing the falter, but Ash drove forward again, carrying not only Samuel's weight, but his failing strength. The course bent toward the ridge where Clint's men had hidden their sabotage. Loose stones rolled, the path slick with mud carried from buckets. Another horse stumbled, sending its rider sprawling. Samuel's heart hammered as Ash approached. He could feel the horse's hesitation, the coiled power waiting for his command. "Now!" Samuel rasped, his voice barely audible. Ash leapt, hooves cutting through air, clearing the trap with a grace that seemed impossible. They landed hard, but upright, surging past fallen competitors. A roar rose from the crowd, disbelief mingled with awe. Clint's stallion thundered ahead, sleek and sure, but Ash's fire grew brighter with every stride. Samuel bent low, whispering words that blurred into prayer. His body screamed with pain, yet his spirit clung to the moment. Ash's ears flicked back, catching every word, and his strides lengthened. The distance closed, inch by inch, until the two horses ran nearly neck and neck. At the final stretch, Samuel's strength waned. His hands slackened, his chest seized with a brutal spasm. He nearly slid from the saddle, but Ash shifted, rising beneath him, holding him upright with every furious motion. Together they surged, crossing the line not in triumph of gold, but in triumph of will. The crowd fell silent, stunned by what they had seen. Samuel collapsed forward, his cheek against the horse's mane, eyes closing as the world tilted. Ash stilled, chest heaving, and lowered his head to shield the man with quiet defiance. The judge's voice rang out, trembling with conviction. No rider braver, no horse more true. A murmur spread like wildfire, voices softening from mockery into reverence. As Samuel slipped toward darkness, the last thing he felt was Ash's steady warmth beneath him. The crowd pressed closer, but the Mustang's glare kept them back. Whispers cut through the silence. That horse did more than any man ever could. The hush that followed the race lingered long after the crowd dispersed, carried back to every corner of the town. Samuel Briggs was lifted from Ash's back, pale and trembling, his breath shallow as if each inhale was a battle of its own. Yet through it all, the horse refused to leave his side. When the doctor tried to push Ash away from the doorway, the Mustang's ears pinned and his hooves struck the ground until Samuel's weak hand reached out, calming him with a touch. "Easy, boy," Samuel whispered. "I'm still here." The animal stilled, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed Samuel's palm, a gesture that spoke louder than words. In the small cabin that night, the town's silence felt different. Where once there had been mockery and dismissal, now there was a reverent hush. A boy appeared first, carrying a sack of oats with both hands, shyly setting it near the stall before darting away. Later, a widow left blankets on the porch, folded with care. The town, which had long turned its back on Samuel, seemed to have been stirred by what they had witnessed. A bond unbroken, loyalty unmeasured. But not all hearts softened. Clint Hargrove arrived in a fury, his coat snapping in the wind as he stormed into the yard. His voice thundered with bitterness. "You think one stunt erases your debt? You think a horse's foolish loyalty makes you a man worth saving?" His hand shot out, seizing Samuel's shirt as he tried to rise from his bed. Ash reacted with sudden fire, rearing high and striking down so close that Clint stumbled backward, his hat flying into the dirt. The Mustang's eyes blazed, daring him to try again. For the first time, Clint retreated, his swagger stripped by a horse that would not yield. The town watched from a distance, and something shifted. They saw Clint for what he was, a bully exposed, trembling before an animal's courage. From that day forward, his hold on their fear loosened. Power, once built on intimidation, began to crumble under the weight of his humiliation. Weeks passed. Samuel's strength returned slowly, though his body remained frail. He often sat by the window, wrapped in a quilt, while Ash grazed just beyond the fence. When the pain grew heavy, the sound of hooves pacing outside steadied him. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, he spoke to Ash as though speaking to his late wife, confessing fears, recalling memories, sharing hopes he could not voice to another soul. The horse never looked away, never faltered, as though carrying the weight of every word. One morning, with winter sunlight spilling across the land, Samuel rose with effort and saddled Ash once more. The motion was slow, deliberate, but filled with quiet joy. "One ride," he murmured. "Just one more to see the world the way it used to be." Ash stood perfectly still as Samuel climbed into the saddle, adjusting his grip with hands that shook less from weakness and more from awe at still being alive to feel it. They rode at dawn, the frost crackling beneath hooves, the air sharp with promise. The horizon glowed with the first touch of gold, painting both man and horse in firelight. Samuel sat straighter than he had in years, his heart lifted not by victory or coin, but by the simple miracle of being carried forward. Ash's stride was steady, powerful, as though he too knew this was no ordinary ride. When they returned, Samuel dismounted slowly, pressing his forehead once more to the horse's neck. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You carried me further than I deserved." Ash breathed out a long, steady sigh, and for a moment it felt as if time itself bowed to their bond. Word spread through town of the sight at dawn. Samuel and Ash silhouetted against the rising sun, their figures blurred into one. Folks said it was a reminder that loyalty was not measured in wealth or strength, but in the devotion that outlasted despair. For years to come, children whispered the tale of the poor man and the horse who did more than any man. A story told not in books, but in the hush of respect whenever hooves echoed down the road. The world did not grow kinder overnight, nor did hardship vanish, but Samuel and Ash had shown something greater than survival. Together, they proved that loyalty could be stronger than hunger, braver than cruelty, and more enduring than death. And as the sun rose higher that morning, casting long shadows across the ranch, The trail of dust behind them shimmered like gold. An unspoken testament that even the poorest man can be rich when he walks beside a loyal friend.